only ones ballsy enough to actually publish it.
Oh.
Yeah.
So.
Nice. All right, you're good at.
All right.
Go, my friend.
So, my name is Julia. As Justin mentioned, I'm an economics journalist, and I have written for a number of outlets from a libertarian standpoint. And for the past 6 months or so, I've been studying the drug war. And I think it's even worse than we think it is. Because we all know the drug war is cruel, inhumane, draconian. Can you guys hear me in the back? Justin just did this thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna turn you up a little bit.
All right.
I can hear. I can hear. He's got.
I'm an old man.
Oh, gotcha.
Sorry.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Better?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So yeah, I've been reading a lot about the drug war, and I do think it's actually one of the worst policies in the U.S. right now. Not only is it draconian, cruel, and just destroys people's lives, I think it's also one of the big reasons that our economy has been stagnating for the past few decades. And the economy has been stagnating. People can kind of parse the data here and there, but income inequality is rising, income mobility is falling, which means that if you're poor now, there's less of a chance you'll rise to the top than there was 40 years ago. And overall median wages have been stagnating. Also, the US is creating fewer new businesses every year than we used to. Now, liberals like to blame this sad fact on laissez-faire capitalism, which we totally have, by the way. Government takes,
That's a joke.
Yeah. But liberals do blame it on this, and I'm always a little surprised. Apparently 100,000 pages of regulations is just totally the market at work. But I have a different explanation. I think it's the drug war. I think that if you make policies that systematically punish and round up poor and minority people from poor communities, you're going to increase income inequality. I think if you lock people up for decades and prevent them from having a real career, you're going to perpetuate income immobility. And I think that if you lock up entrepreneurs, you're going to tank the US economy overall. So let's actually start with the last one. I think the drug war has been one of the big reasons the US is less entrepreneurial than it used to be. Because drug dealing is inherently entrepreneurial. I mean, think about it. If you're a drug dealer, you have to find clients. You have to manage your inventory. You have to manage your sales. You have to manage overhead and your employees. And you have to do all of that while turning a profit. You have to be aware of your competitors in a crowded space, and you have to navigate that. Sounds pretty entrepreneurial. But I would actually posit that drug dealers are more entrepreneurial than most of us in the legal markets. And I'd like to pose a question to you guys, especially those of you who run businesses, who have started businesses, or who are, frankly, marketers. How would you market your company if you couldn't risk the cops knowing you existed? I mean, think about it. Facebook ads are out. Google ads are out. You can't just throw up a website and start selling through that, not unless you want to be the next Ross Ulbricht. You can't even set up a storefront and wait for foot traffic because, again, that's a little bit obvious to the cops. So how do you do it? It takes a lot of creativity, it takes a lot of ingenuity, it takes a lot of hustle. Those are all things that entrepreneurs need. In the same vein, most entrepreneurs are scared of the competition, and with good reason. But how much more worried would you be if you knew that your competitors wouldn't just undercut you on price, they might take photographs and threaten your family? And how much more worried would you be if you knew that you couldn't actually talk to the police about this because the police would just throw you in prison? How would you handle that? You might hire armed security, but that takes a big chunk out of your profits and they can always be bribed. It's an ongoing question. Another problem that drug dealers face is that for almost every business, churn is a big problem, churn being clients leave. Okay, admittedly, that never happens to me because all my clients love me, but for every other business, churn is an issue. How much more of a problem would it be if you knew your clients had a problem of going to prison? Successful drug dealing takes a lot of hustle, takes a lot of risk, and takes a lot of creativity. And those are all things entrepreneurs need. It also takes giant brass balls, frankly. The fear of having your business fail is nothing compared to the fear that most of your competitors and most of people in law enforcement would like to see you some combination of dead or in prison. And by the way, this isn't just theory. When drug dealers become legal entrepreneurs, they thrive. Jay-Z got to start dealing drugs. So did Russell Simmons, who is the former CEO of Def Jam Records, one of the largest African-American owned media companies in the US. a lot of entrepreneurs, especially if they grew up on the streets, especially if they grew up without access to a traditional education, got their start from dealing drugs. And to be clear, I'm not talking about violent drug dealers. You know, if your idea of running a business is to kill your competitors, you can rot in prison, and I have zero sympathy for you. But a lot of drug dealers are non-violent. I'm thinking of, so I went to CU Boulder, and I lived in a frat house, and this guy would come over every Thursday, and he would pull open his briefcase, and he would show off his products. He knew his target market pretty well, honestly. But he would show off his products. He had his pricing laid out. He had skills laid out. He had appointments laid out for the rest of the day. And this guy wasn't out there shooting. He didn't carry a gun. He was just trying to hustle and make it through college without debt. But this was pre-2014. If he'd been caught by the police, he would be in prison right now. That's the reality for most drug dealers. Now, we all know how important entrepreneurship is for economic growth. Entrepreneurs create new products. They create the Facebooks, the Googles, the Lyfts, the Ubers. They create new services. They employ tons of people. They're the reason that our economy has been dynamic to the point where it has been. But again, the US startup rate has been falling for several years now. Frankly, longer than that. And a lot of people find this hard to believe because you have services like Facebook, again, like Google, like Uber, these giants. But in the startup industry, those are actually called unicorns. Because they're so rare, they may as well not exist. The vast majority of startups are kind of mom and pop shops or one-man enterprises, and those are the ones that are being less and less common. And I think one of the reasons for that is that we do have this federal policy where entrepreneurs are systematically persecuted, hunted down, rounded up, and imprisoned. The second way the drug war really ruins the economy is by taking a giant bite out of the career prospects of poor minority people. Now let's step back for a minute. Think about the size of the drug war. In the US, 500,000 people are behind bars because of the drug war. 500,000. It's actually a little more than that because that doesn't include people who were had a gun on them or anything like that. This is just people who are there solely for drugs. That's a lot of people whose lives are being ruined. And to illustrate that, let's take the case of, let's call him Marco. You know, Marco lives in Detroit. Marco's an auto, he works on cars, auto mechanic.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be the one. You can tell I'm very blue collar. Marco's an auto mechanic, and he lives in a poor neighborhood, but he's trying to save some money to switch jobs, to move into a nicer house, and to become middle class. Let's say Marco has about $3,000 to $4,000 saved up. The police arrest Marco for drug possession. Right away, Marco's going to jail. And by the way, for those who don't know, the difference between jail and prison is that jail is basically a holding cell where you go while you wait for your trial, and prison is where you go after you're sentenced. So right away, as soon as those cuffs go on Marco, he knows he's going to jail. And that means a few things. One, it means he's probably not showing up for work tomorrow. He might not show up for work the next day or the next day or the next day either. A lot of people think of jail as something that, it's a holding cell. You shouldn't be there more than, 24 hours. That's not the case. Jail can last for days, weeks, even months. There was a 16-year-old kid in New York who was in jail for 3 years before his trial would have come up. He was accused of stealing a backpack. Jail can last for a while. And the whole time that Mark is in jail, he's not going to work. Pretty soon his employer is probably going to fire him because he can't be a man down for, again, days, weeks, months. It's in his self-interest to find someone else. Now, if Marco pays what's called bail, he can get out of jail. Bail is basically where you give the government a sum of money as a loan, basically collateral, and they let you go free in return. And then when you come back for your trial, you get that money back. Again, it's basically collateral so you don't skip town. The problem is bail's expensive. Marco's got $3,000 to $4,000 saved. The average bail for a felony charge is $10,000. So how is Marco going to pay for that? He could get a loan, but that just puts him into debt. He could hire what's called a bail bondsman, which will actually pay bail for him. The problem with that is the bail bondsman charges 10% as a fee. So 10% of $10,000 is $1,000. So right away, best case scenario, just for being accused of a crime, Marco's out $1,000. Worst case scenario, he can't find a way to pay that bail, and he just loses his job because he's languishing in jail for days, weeks, months. So then Marco goes to court, and let's assume that Marco's convicted. You know what? Let's even assume he's guilty. He'll go to prison for 5, 7, 10, 20 years as a result of the drug charges. That is going to mean a giant chunk out of his lifetime earnings. That's all time where he can't put money away into savings. He can't put money away into trying to buy a new house. He can't put money away into a retirement account. He can't even contribute to Social Security to try and finance his retirement that way. He can't try and save up money for his son's college or anything else. He's just sitting in prison, completely cut out of the workforce. And the whole time he's in prison, he is not learning new skills. Marco's an auto mechanic. He needs to work on new cars. But let's say it's a 10-year prison sentence. By the time he gets out of prison, it'll be 2028, and the last car he'll be able to work on was in 2018. And he won't be able to work on that for 10 solid years. His career prospects are about to take a big drop, even once he gets out. And once Marco gets out, by the way, his career prospects will take a drop for 2 reasons. One, a lot of companies have something called a box, which is where they ask you if you've been convicted of a crime on your application, on your resume. And if you check that box, your application goes right to the bottom of the pile. The Koch brothers are actually one of the biggest companies in the US that doesn't do this, for which I give them unending praise. But most companies aren't like that. Most companies won't hire Marco because he was convicted. And even those that do, I mean, who's going to hire him? He was out of the job market for 10 years. He wasn't able to work on cars for 10 years. His skills are very rusty and very out of date. That's going to look pretty bad, even for an employer who's willing to hire him. Additionally, in many states, when you're out of prison, you go on probation, which is pretty expensive. Additionally, in many states, you can't have a driver's license if you're convicted of a drug crime. So right away, Marco's going to have a hell of a time getting to his next job if he can find one. Marco's network is also going to be people he met in the last 10 years, people in prison. A lot of gang members, a lot of guys like that. All of these basically means that when Marco steps out of prison, when he finally sees daylight again, he will have very low career prospects, a very poor network, and not a lot of potential. And that's one of the reasons that US recidivism rate is so high. Recidivism is the idea that after you commit a crime, after you get out, how many of you are going to commit another crime and go back? The recidivism rate in the US is about 33% over 5 years, which means that even once Marco does his time and sees daylight again, there's about a 1 in 3 odds he'll be going back to prison in the next 5 years. That kind of thing takes an immense toll on his career and on his lifetime earnings, and it's one of the reasons that Marco was born poor, and he'll probably work and die poor after that conviction. The other way the drug war, and this happens to hundreds of thousands of people, the other way the drug war really ruins the economy, but especially the poor economy, especially people who are in that bottom 20% of income, is that it perpetuates what's called intergenerational poverty. Intergenerational poverty is the idea that if your parents are poor, you'll be born poor, you'll live poor, you'll die poor. It's not very much fun. And the reason the drug war perpetuates that is because the drug war doesn't go after everyone at the same time. I mentioned CU Boulder. None of us were up there getting raided. You know, we have wealthy parents. Boulder is frankly more white than a lot of cities. All those things help you avoid the cops.
But you guys weren't doing any drugs at all.
Of course not. None. The drug war focuses on certain communities. It focuses on primarily poor and primarily minority communities, and it ravages them. And that has really bad implications for the children in those communities. I mean, think about it. If you're poor and let's say you're a 14-year-old kid growing up in inner city Detroit, and your mother or father is taken away, that's going to have profound implications on the rest of your life. You're going to grow up with a lot of anger towards the system overall, towards life overall, because someone that you loved and admired is now behind bars for something that's kind of dumb. You're going to lack that strong role model. If your mother was taken away and put behind bars, you'll be short one strong female role model. All of that, you also get a sense that the police are very unfair and targeted you, which does make people want to act out more. All of that means that children whose parents are convicted of a crime are more likely to be unemployed. They're more likely to drop out of high school. They're more likely not to go to college, and they're more likely to become criminals. And all of that means they're probably more likely to end up poor for their entire lives. And this is one of the reasons that I'm always surprised that conservatives support the drug war, because conservatives have always known the importance of a two-family household, or a two-parent household. And to be clear, I don't mean two heterosexual parents, you know? They can be two gay parents, two lesbian parents, two transgender parents. You can have two parents with a shared goat fetish, as long as you pay attention to your kid. But two parents is important. Actually, by the way, pretty sure every conservative in the audience just lost me right there. Actually, more than two parents. Let's get on the polygamy train. You can have 4 or 5 parents, as long as they actually care about their kid. The one can, yeah.
You can consider grandparents as parents.
Grandparents.
Yeah.
That's true, yeah. Very true. But you do need like strong adult role models in a kid's life if he's going to do well. And the drug war systematically removes those role models from people who are minorities and who are poor. And that's one of the reasons that we have a much higher rate of intergenerational poverty than we did a few generations ago. All of this means that, let's put it all together, the drug war perpetuates income immobility, it perpetuates income inequality, it keeps poor people poor, and by locking up entrepreneurs, it also stagnates the US economy. It stagnates the US economy in another way as well. Because what the drug war basically says to 500,000 generally working poor Americans is that you aren't allowed to work anymore. You aren't allowed to contribute to society. You aren't allowed to use your skills, your services, your hard work, and your intelligence to improve your company, to help your clients, or do anything else. Given that, that's going to take an immense toll on the economy. Now, I've talked a lot about the toll of the drug war on people's career prospects. And frankly, that's kind of easy, because careers are important, but they're not life. And also, you can talk in the abstract about someone's career and earning potential. But I want to point out the drug war doesn't just punish people's careers, it destroys their lives. The drug war is cruel, it's inhumane, and it's draconian. And here's what I mean by that. A lot of states have something called the 3 strikes rules. These were pushed in the 90s, especially by Bill Clinton. A lot of states still have them. And what that means is that if you're convicted of 3 felonies, you'll go to prison for life. So let's take the example of a mother who's 22 years old. Let's say she has 2 kids, 1 2-year-old son, 1 1-year-old daughter. Let's say that at 19, she was caught buying an ounce of marijuana. That's a felony in most states. That's 1 strike against her. She might go to prison for 2 years. She might come out early on good behavior or something. But then when she's 22, she gets busted again. She has an ounce of marijuana, and let's say she has a gram of cocaine in her other pockets. Now, she's not an addict. You know, she's not doing cocaine every night. She's a recreational user. Most people use alcohol recreationally. But the minute the cops find her, the minute they, pat her down and find the drugs in her pocket, and the minute they handcuff her and put her in the cop car, her life is over. That marijuana and that cocaine is strikes 2 and 3, which means this 22-year-old woman will die in prison. As soon as she enters prison, she will never leave. She will never see daylight. She will live, she will grow old, and she will die in a cell. Her children will never know their mother, except for occasional visitation rights, because their mother smoked a plant. That's the kind of inhumaneness I'm talking about with the drug war. And to be clear, I'm not saying that people who advocate the drug war are bad people. I know a lot of them, I know a lot of conservatives. They have their hearts in the right place. They want things like law and order and security, and they actually think they're helping poor minority communities by fighting the scourge of drug addiction. They're for the most part decent people, but they are dramatically wrong about the facts of the drug war. That said, there is good news. Momentum is turning to our side as more and more people realize this. A recent poll showed that 64% of Americans support legalizing marijuana. That means Republicans and Democrats. Jeff Sessions is a dinosaur, and very few people take him seriously.
We just need to get him high, man.
That would be the dream. God, he'd be so chill, too. People in Congress on both sides are actually responding to Jeff Sessions' drug war crap with bills to legalize or decriminalize marijuana and other drugs. And once marijuana becomes legal, it's a short step to decriminalizing harder drugs. What that means is that momentum is turning in our favor. And I think that if we can continue to fight this, and if we fight hard and we work with people on both sides of the aisle, we can end the drug war in our lifetimes and restore liberty. Thank you.